Hello everybody and welcome back to the Introduction to Web Development course. Today we are going to talk about Lesson 3, which is JavaScript Fundamentals, and as usual for today's lesson I am your educator, Gary McNeil. Now just to let you guys know before we start that this is an on-demand lesson. So what that means, guys, is this is a pre-recorded lesson. It is not live. And the reason I've done this, guys, is just because JavaScript is somewhat of a complicated topic, so I just wanted to give you guys the opportunity to be able to have this video immediately as a recording. You can pause it, you can go back on things you didn't understand, and if you want to, you can also code along with it as well. So let's get started and firstly talk about what JavaScript is. So as I said, guys, today we're going to be taking a look at JavaScript fundamentals. But what JavaScript is actually, guys, is the programming language of the web. Programming language of HTML and the web. It's used by web developers to add functionality to web pages. So this can include things like data processing. This can include things like checking what a user has typed into a form, seeing if it's valid. You can do animations with it as well, or just kind of edit page content dynamically with it. And JavaScript, guys, it's going to run inside your web browser like your HTML documents, and it's going to be able to do those various things as I said. So let's have a look at what we're going to be looking at in today's lesson. As usual, I've made a little checklist. And you can see there's a lot to be covered in today's lesson, guys, but don't worry, some of these points will only take about 30 seconds to a minute of explanation. So let's go on to our first topic for today, which is the script tag. So the script tag, guys, or the script element, if you will, is going to be used inside our HTML document, and what it's going to allow us to do is write JavaScript code. Now, unlike other HTML tags we have seen, text inside this script tag will not actually be displayed on the page. Now, this is because the script tag is only going to contain the JavaScript code and not actual page content. And the script tag, guys, is usually placed at the bottom of the body inside of our HTML page. And the reason for this is that when pages load, so say you're loading your HTML pages, all your headings, paragraphs, and so on, by putting the script tag at the bottom of the page, we allow the full content of the body to load before the JavaScript code does. Now, this is important because if the JavaScript code, say, needs to interact with a specific HTML element, so say if it needs to interact with a paragraph, if that paragraph has not actually loaded when the JavaScript code goes looking for it, nothing's going to happen, or the page will crash. One of those two things. So I'm going to pop open Notepad++ now, guys, with a blank HTML document I created earlier. So let me pop out of PowerPoint here. And the first thing I'm going to do, guys, is I'm just going to go ahead and add these script tags. So you can see I have my little document here. I have my title that says JavaScript Fundamentals. And as I said, guys, the script tag is going to go at the bottom of the body. Now, obviously, we've no content in here at the moment, but I'll just put it near the bottom just so it's clear for us to see and clear for us to read. So the first thing, guys, I'm going to be talking about in today's lesson is how we're actually going to be able to write something on our HTML page using JavaScript. Now, before in our HTML lesson, guys, we talked about putting content on our page using things like paragraph tags, using things like heading tags, so on and so forth, and that was how we got content to display on our page. We can also do that programmatically or using JavaScript code with a function called document.write. And we'll be going on to what functions are a bit later on in the lesson, guys, but all you guys need to know for now is that a function is just a bit of code that's designed to do a specific task. So in this case, this function here, document.write, it's designed to just write something to our HTML document. So what we're saying is really target my HTML document and then write something to the page. Now you might notice that I haven't actually specified anything to write to the page. So the way I can do that is I can just go inside of these circular brackets here, put a set of quotes or double quotes, and then just write something inside of here. So I'll say hello from from JavaScript. Perfect. So now guys, what's going to happen when I load my HTML page is JavaScript is going to try and write that to the page. So let's go ahead and run this inside of Chrome here. And you can see that hello from JavaScript has been written to the page. So that's the basically how we're going to get JavaScript to be kind of outputting things for us onto our HTML page. Now, we can also do things, guys, like calculations, comparisons in here. But first, let me talk about why I have actually put quotes around this particular bit of text here. So when we're writing JavaScript, guys, if we don't want JavaScript to process something, by which I mean if we don't want JavaScript to try and process what we've written, what we will do is put it inside of quotes. And in computer science and computer programming, this is called a string. So a string merely is just a bunch of text inside quotes that will be not processed by JavaScript. So for example, guys, if I put document write, all of this inside of quotes, nothing's going to happen. Let me just close these quotes off here. Okay, so if I put all these inside of quotes and then I refresh my page, you can see I've refreshed the page and now nothing's showing on the screen. And that's because basically what I'm telling JavaScript here is because I put this inside of quotes, I do not want it processed. It's just a bit of text. So you can see if I remove these quotes here and put them back in where they belong, the code inside my brackets is not going to be processed as actual JavaScript code. It's just going to be printed out to the page as is. And that's what strings are in JavaScript. So I said we can also do things right out to the page, things like calculations. So let's have a look at a couple of those. So in this case, we can write things like 3 plus 3. I'll just save that and refresh my page in Google Chrome. And you can see I get 6 printed out to the page. Very easy to understand. We can do multiplication as well. We can do division and all of that kind of stuff. So I do multiplication, you can see now in that case, I just get 9. And it's important for me to mention at this point, guys, in order for multiplication and stuff to work in JavaScript, I don't actually need this document write function. The reason I'm using this, guys, is for just us to be able to see what the result of what I'm writing is when I print it out to the page. So the document write is just to print stuff out to the HTML document. I could just as easily do those calculations in JavaScript without this function and they just wouldn't be shown on the page. So we can also do things like comparison. So I can say 3 is greater than 1. And what we'll get in this case, if we go back to our HTML page here, is true. So when we're doing comparisons in JavaScript, guys, we will be returned true or false. So 3 is greater than 1, that's true. So we will be returned true on the page. But if I go back into Notepad++ here, say 3 is less than 1, obviously we know that's false. And you can see then that false will be printed out to the page. And that's kind of the idea of comparisons in JavaScript. So the last thing I want to show you guys before we move on is probably the most important thing we're going to show you in today's lesson, guys, and that is how to do a comment inside of JavaScript. So guys, comments in coding are basically bits of text that you can use to tell you what a specific part of your code does. And the way we can do this in JavaScript simply is by typing 2 forward slashes, just like this. You can see that those have immediately turned green, and I can write in here, this is a comment. And this isn't going to be processed by JavaScript, not by JavaScript code itself. It's not going to be thought of as a string. It's just simply going to be there when we're looking at our code, and it's going to tell us what this bit of code under here does. So if I wanted to write something that would help me out here, I could say something like, this function will write out to the page. And I know maybe if I come back in a week's time, I know if I come back in a month's time, that I'll have that comment there. I'll be able to see what the bit of code does just to kind of jog my memory. And this is going to become more and more useful for you guys because as your code files get bigger, you're going to have probably 50 lines of JavaScript, 100 lines of JavaScript, and you physically can't remember it all, guys. You're going to need to write some comments to let yourself know how it's actually working and what you were actually trying to do when you were writing that particular bit of code. So let's pop back inside of PowerPoint here and move on to our next section. So we've actually covered a lot so far, guys. You can see we've actually got the whole left side column of our checklist done. So we talked about the script tag and how that's used in a HTML document. And like I said, so the script tag is going to be used so that we can put JavaScript code inside of our HTML page. We use document write to write content to a HTML page. We talked about what strings were, we did a few calculations, and we did a bit of comparison which returned us either a true or false value. So if any of that didn't make sense, guys, just pop back, rewind a little bit, watch it again, code along with it, because really, as I've said, you know, from lesson 1 to lesson 2, this is all about practice. It's all about you guys writing down the code, seeing how it works, and it's only by doing that that you're going to be able to understand it. So let's have a look at our next section where we're going to be talking about using JavaScript code in order to modify HTML elements. By which I mean modify things on a HTML page. So let's have a look at how we're going to do that. So we've looked at our document write function, and that allowed us to add content to HTML pages. But what about modifying content inside of a HTML element? So let's go back into Notepad++ here just for a second, and I'm just going to add some things that we're going to be able to modify later on. Let's say we're going to have a paragraph that says just something really simple like I am a paragraph. Close it off, and I'll do another paragraph as well. Just on the next line, and I'll say I am the second paragraph. There we go. And I'm going to give this paragraph, guys, an ID. Now, I'll explain why this is in a second, but don't worry about it for now. I'm just going to give this second paragraph an ID. We're going to use that a little bit later on in the lesson. So let's have a look at how we're going to modify these paragraphs that I've written on my page using JavaScript. So let's pop back inside PowerPoint for a second. Okay, so we're going to use two different functions to modify our HTML elements. And as we learned earlier, functions are just bits of code that are designed to do certain things. So the first of these, guys, is the getElementsByTagName function. Now, I know this probably looks very complicated, but don't worry, I'll explain exactly how it works. Let's go through it. First thing it does, guys, is it targets the HTML document using the document keyword. What it does then is it tries to get the HTML elements on the document based on their tag name. So that's the .getElementByTagName part. And the name of the element it's actually going to look for are put inside the brackets, inside of quotes at the end of the function. So in this case, what I'm saying is target my document, and I want all the tags that are P tags. So I'm getting all of my paragraph tags. And just in that little example I just did in my HTML page, I had 2 paragraphs. So in that case, I would be returned both of those paragraphs if I ran that function. And we'll be able to do stuff with those a bit later on. So that's our first function. The second function, guys, is probably going to be a little bit more useful because it's going to allow us to target single things. And this is our getElementById function. So similar to the previous function, we'll go through it again. So this is similar, except it's only going to return one element. So the first thing it does is it targets our document, exactly the same as before. And then instead of getElementsByTagName, it's going to get ElementById. And you can see in this case, inside my brackets at the end, it's actually going to target an ID name as opposed to a tag name. So I'm not going to target things like headings with this, guys. I'm going to be targeting IDs which I have given them. So if we take those 2 paragraphs up the top right hand side of the slide, what this function is going to get me back is just a paragraph with the ID of paragraph 2. So for our purposes, guys, we don't actually want all of that information back. All we want is the text inside of those tags, because we're not going to edit the tags themselves, we just want the text. So let's have a look at how we're going to do that in JavaScript. So to get the text inside of a HTML element, we only need to add slightly more code to what we already have. So the same way as before, guys, we target the document, that's step 1. We get the element using its ID. In this case, we can get it by class as well, but let's say we just want one element. And then after the brackets, we put dot inner HTML. And what that's going to do for us, guys, is that's going to get everything that is inside of our two tags or inside of our element. So by doing this, only the content inside the element will be returned. So I can also do things like assign a new value to that once I have it. So let's pop back into Notepad++ and see about changing some of those paragraphs. So we'll pop back outside of here. I'm just going to delete what I have inside of my script tag here. And we're going to get our elements by ID. Let's just target our paragraph 2. So first thing I'm going to do, guys, I'm going to say document, target my HTML document. That's just our keyword to do that in JavaScript. I'm going to say get element by ID. And what I'm going to do now, guys, is I'm going to put the name of the ID inside of quotes inside of these brackets. So you can see up here I have the ID I've given it is par2, so I can just go ahead and put that in, PAR2. And then to get what's inside that second paragraph, I simply use dot inner HTML. And that's how I'm going to actually target what's inside this particular paragraph. So let's pop into Google Chrome for a second. So you can see at the moment I am the second paragraph and I am a paragraph. Let's go ahead and change what's in here using JavaScript. Okay, so I'll just take away the semicolon and I'll put equal to this is new. So what I've done there, guys, is I've gotten the value of what's inside this paragraph tag and I've said set it equal to this is new. So I'm setting it equal to something else. So what's going to happen in this case is this text is no longer going to be there and JavaScript is going to replace it with this is new. So if I want to put a comment to explain that to myself, I can say 1, target the document. I can say step 2. Let me do that. Get element by ID using its ID. Step 3, get the text inside the element. And step 4, should probably change that to step 3. Here we go. And step 4, change it to something else. So those are good comments to have, guys, and you know, it might seem like a lot of text, but in the long run, if you're doing things that are very new to you, that are very complicated, it's not gonna add much loading time to your page, guys, at all. If anything, it'll be 0.0001 of a second. So don't worry about adding these comments in order to kind of help yourself along in understanding this new concept, these new concepts. Okay. So let's see now, if we reload our document, what's going to happen. So I'll reload the document, and you can see now that JavaScript has gone ahead and changed the text of this second paragraph to this is new instead of I am paragraph 2. And just to let you guys know a few little points on JavaScript before I move on to the next section. You may have noticed that throughout this lesson I've been putting a semicolon at the end of my lines. Now this isn't for no reason. The reason for this, guys, is when you're finished a statement in JavaScript, you need to let JavaScript know that you have finished. So the way you do that is actually just by adding a semicolon to the end of your statement, and JavaScript will then know that you're finished. So if I just delete this for a second, guys, and say I'm saying document write, say I want to write something out to my page. If I can spell, there we go. I'll just say hello. Just put a semicolon there at the end to let JavaScript know that I'm finished. I'll move on to the next line, then I'll do something else. Maybe I'll do document get element by ID. So I'll do get element by ID and say we want to target that par2 ID again. and I'll put a semicolon at the end of that. And that's a good practice to get into, guys. Putting the semicolon at the end of your JavaScript statements, it makes it easier to read and it lets you know that that particular section has finished. So that's kind of how to mess around with our content using JavaScript, how to kind of programmatically change things. So the next thing we're going to talk about, guys, in today's lesson, now that we've learned how to modify HTML elements, we're going to talk a little bit about variables. Now, a variable, guys, in JavaScript, you may have heard of it before, but if you haven't, a variable can be thought of as essentially a named container for storing values. So to put that into simpler terms, it's just a box that you can put a value in and you can put a name on it. So this is, imagine you had a cardboard box and say you're putting clothes in it. You'd write the word clothes on that box and you'd put your clothes inside it. Similarly, in JavaScript, a variable is just like kind of like a box in JavaScript that you can put values in. So I can put values such as calculations in there. I can put values such as, names and strings in there, whatever I want. And the way this works in JavaScript, guys, the keyword you need to use to do this variable or declare this variable is the var keyword. So you're going to be declaring variables in JavaScript using that keyword. So let's go ahead and see how that's going to be done inside of Notepad++. So I'll just get rid of these two things here. And I might even get rid of these two paragraphs as well, just to make it as clear as possible for us to read. Okay. So as I said, guys, the way you're going to declare a variable in JavaScript is basically a three-step procedure. The first thing you're going to do is declare the var keyword. So declare your variable using the var keyword. Second thing you're going to do is give that variable a name. So let's say I want to store my dog's name. So let's say pet. And then what I'll do is I'll say is equal to, and on the other side of the equal sign, I can say the name of my dog, which is Buster. End that with a semicolon. And now what's happened, guys, is the value Buster is going to be stored inside the variable called pet. So if instead of, doing something like document write Buster, I can now say something like document write pet. So let's have a look at how that's going to work. So I'll say document.write pet. See, I'm not using quotes because I want JavaScript to process whatever is inside of this variable. So let's see now if this is written out to our document. So I'll just refresh the page and you can see there that Buster has been written out to the screen. And guys, variables aren't limited in what they can hold, and neither are strings. So I mentioned earlier that a string is just a bunch of text that JavaScript doesn't process, but you can actually include HTML in this. So say if I wanted to add a heading in here, so maybe a h3 tag, and I'll say name of pet, close that h3 tag, and then I can put a paragraph tag in as well. So I'll say paragraph. So what this variable is going to hold now is all of this string of text. We're going to have this heading tag, this text in here, the closing tag, the paragraph tags, and also the text inside of those. So instead of having to write all of that out to the page myself, I can simply say document write pet, and that will write all of that HTML out to the page for me. Now you may be thinking at this point, Gary, well that doesn't really seem very useful because you've actually written the HTML anyway, so why wouldn't you just write it out to the HTML page in the first place? And the reason for that, guys, is oftentimes you're going to get the HTML from somewhere else. So you may be pulling values and HTML from a database and storing it in a variable, then printing it out to the page. And we're going to see how we're going to do that more in lesson 7. But just to give you guys an idea of why I've given you this example. So as I said, variables can hold any value. So say if I want to change this, I'll just delete this document right here, and I'll change this variable name to sum. And instead of holding this big long string in it, let's do a calculation instead. So I can say 5 times 69. And now what this variable will hold is the result of this calculation. So I can write that out to the page, going document write sum, which will write out whatever is inside this variable. Go back into Google Chrome and refresh it, and you can see 345 has been written out to the page. So that's variables, guys. You can just really think of them as containers for storing values. Very simple, nothing complicated there, but we will see how we're going to be doing some very, very cool things with them in the next lesson, and then especially in lesson 7. So let's pop back into PowerPoint here and move on to our next section. So we talked about variables, and I realized that I've covered a lot today so far, and we're not done yet. But everything I've covered today, guys, and everything I will cover will be used again and again and again during the course. So don't worry if you don't get it straight away. You can rewind the video, you can watch it again, and I will be doing all of this stuff later on in the course. So let's talk about functions now. So functions, guys, as I said at the start of the lesson, they're blocks of code designed to perform a particular task. Now, the difference between what we've been doing so far and functions is that functions are only ever going to run when they are called. What that means is they don't just happen out of nowhere when the page loads like the other things we've gone over in this lesson. Something needs to actually call this function or call the name of the function before it actually goes ahead and runs. And similar to variables, functions have to be declared and they have to be named. So it is kind of a 3-step process like we did in the variables example. So let's have a look inside of Notepad++ for an example on this. So I'll just get rid of this bit here. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is declare my function. So 3-step process once again. So I'm just going to use the function keyword. Then what I'm going to do is name this function. I'm just going to call it myfunc. For short for my function, and a couple of things I need after this, guys. So I need 2 circular brackets, and I also need an opening curly bracket and a closing curly bracket, and I'll explain what those are for. I'll explain what these circular brackets are for just in a minute. So inside these curly brackets, guys, this is where all the code is going to go that this function has in it. So whatever I want this function to do, I need to code it in between these 2 curly brackets here. So let's say we want to make this function maybe edit the content of one of our paragraphs. So let's get a paragraph first of all. We'll give it an ID of just par, let's say. And let's have some text inside this. Says hello from HTML. I'll close that off, and there we have our paragraph. So what I want us to do with this function, guys, is I want this to change the content inside of that paragraph. And as we saw earlier in the lesson, if we want to change content inside of a paragraph, we use the document get element by ID. And I don't mean just paragraph, guys. This can change the content of any HTML element, but just in this case I'll be using paragraphs. So I'm going to target the par ID, and I'll say inner HTML is equal to, and what I want it to eventually turn into, guys, I'll just say hello from JS. So hello from JavaScript instead. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this code inside of our web browser. So you can see if I refresh my page here, it still says hello from HTML. And the reason for this, guys, is because this function actually hasn't been called, so the function hasn't run. So I said in the PowerPoint slide that functions will only ever run when they are called. So if you want to call a function, you can do it one of a couple of ways. So the first way you can do is just by writing the name of the function in JavaScript. So you can write myfunc, opening closing circular bracket, and this line will then call that function. It will run the code inside of this function. So if I refresh my page now, you can see that it says hello from JS instead of hello from HTML. Now, it would seem kind of pointless to call our function within JavaScript if that's all it does. How about instead we call it using a button in HTML? So let's have a look at how we're going to do that. So to make a button in HTML, guys, all you have to do is use the button tag. Very easy, I know. Opening and closing. And we can just put some text inside that button. We can say maybe click me. And now what will happen when I reload my page is you'll see this nice little button. But if I click on it, probably hear me clicking there, you'll notice it actually isn't doing anything. And the reason for that, guys, is because I haven't attached this button here to any of this JavaScript code. They are completely separated at the moment. So the way I'm going to do this is simply by adding an attribute for this button. So obviously I want something to happen when I click this button. So the attribute I use is called onClick. And as with all the other attributes, guys, it's equal to and two quotes. And what I can put inside of this onClick attribute, guys, is the name of the JavaScript function I want to run when the button's clicked. So in this case, the name of my JavaScript function that I wrote is myfunc. So I can just go ahead and put that inside the onClick event here. And now if I go back inside my page and refresh it, I can go click me, and you can see now it goes from hello from HTML to hello from JS, because we've added a JavaScript function behind the scenes that will allow us to programmatically change what's inside that little paragraph there. So that's kind of the idea of what functions are for. They're for doing specific bits of code whenever we want them to do them. So say, for example, instead of just changing a HTML element, what if instead when we clicked a button it verified a password? What if instead when we clicked a button it sent something down to our database, added a Facebook post? You guys can see already, I'm sure you're thinking of loads of examples in your head. We can tie so much code that does so many different things to our web page with just a simple button and a small bit of JavaScript. And this is where it gets really exciting. So it's all very well and good, guys, kind of changing our HTML with a button, changing it to one specific thing. But let's take this one step further. What about instead, if instead of just clicking the button and saying, oh, hello from JS, instead of hello from HTML, we're actually able to write what we want it to change to. Let's have a look at how we do that. So we'll pop back into our HTML document here, and what we're going to add, guys, is an input box. So let me show you guys how to do that. So I'm going to say input type is equal to text. So this is going to give us a text box. And I'm also going to give this an ID, guys. I'll give this an ID of, let's just say user input. And then I'll go ahead and close that off. Now, you'll notice that I haven't actually put a closing input tag. And let me show you guys why that is. Let's pop back into Google Chrome here for a second. So the reason I don't have to use a closing tag for my input box is that there's no text inside it already when it's populated. So input tags do not need to be closed because you can't actually put any text inside them inside the HTML document itself unless you use another attribute, which I'll talk about later in the course. So just take it from me, guys, just take it as is for the moment. Don't worry about the closing tag. We don't need it at all. It doesn't actually exist. So just trust me on that one for now. So there's a couple of steps we need to do in order for us to change this bit of text here to whatever someone types into this little box. So let's think about that for a second and kind of wire that up. So let me just go ahead and get rid of this. And I'm going to I'll just leave that there for now. So guys, think about in your head for a second, what do you think the steps are for us to take in order to change our paragraph to whatever's typed inside that input box? Now let me just think for myself. So I have one step, I have two steps. I think it's only two steps. So I get this, then I do that. So you guys think along with me here as well. So let's go through the steps together. So the first step, I'll put in a comment. Always good to use our comments to let us know what's going on. First step, we have to get the value from inside that input box. So get the value from inside the input box. That's our first step. Second step, say step 2. Put that value inside the paragraph. So those are really our two basic steps that we need our function to do in order for this to work for us. So what's going to happen is the button's going to click, it's going to trigger this function. The first thing that's going to happen is the value from the input box is going to be gotten, and the second thing that's going to happen is that value is going to be put inside our paragraph. So let's have a look at how we're going to do that. So let's get the value from inside of the input box. And as we saw previously in the lesson, if we want to get a value, we go straight to our get element by ID. So get element by ID, and our ID I gave, that was user input, so I'll just type that in here. And instead of inner HTML, guys, here, I need to use .value. And the reason for this, guys, is that because our input box doesn't have a closing tag, there's no inner text in it. We can only get the value from the box itself, what someone actually types into it. So I have the value from it. And what I can do to make this easier for myself, if I want to maybe reuse that value later on, I can use a variable. So I'll say var input is equal to document get element by ID, the value, user input dot value. So what this variable is going to store in reality is whatever is typed into this input box. So that's our first step. Second step is going to be to put that value inside of our paragraph. So similar again, we'll get that paragraph. So we'll say document get element by ID. And the ID I've given that is par or PAR, whichever you prefer. And we'll say inner HTML. And what we'll do now, guys, is we'll set that equal to input. And as we can see here, input is the variable I have used to store the value of what's inside the text box. So what's going to happen now, guys, when I click the button, I'm going to get what's in this text box, I'm going to put it inside this paragraph. So let's see if we've done that correctly and if that all is going to work for us. Refresh my page, and I'll just write some text in here. Maybe, I hope this works. I'm sure it will. Click the button, and there we go. We can see our paragraph now has been changed to whatever I put inside of the text box. So you can see now, guys, we've gone from having a static HTML page that just displays data to having something a little bit more interactive. Now, this is going to be the last example I'll do with you guys today, because I do realize I've covered a heck of a lot. Do go back over the lesson. We'll be doing way more of this in lesson 4, in lesson 7, continuing on towards the end of the course. But let's pop back inside of PowerPoint now to see what we've covered today. So, we covered the script tag. We wrote to a HTML page, all kinds of different things we can do with JavaScript at a basic level, like calculations, comparisons, and so on and so forth. We modified our HTML page, we stored some things inside of variables, then we took a look at functions triggered by button clicks, and how to get user input and put it on our HTML